I'm Mark Golub, and from the 2014 JFNA GA, I have the extraordinary opportunity to sit with a gentleman who has made a significant impact on Jewish life here in America. He has been involved in Federation work for years. And how many years have you been involved in Federation?
I've been in Jewish community work for 44 years.
44 years. Barry Shrage heads the Jewish Federation of Boston. And how long have you been in Boston?
27 years.
Well, Mazal Tov.
Thank you.
And there are many wonderful people down here, people who've really made a contribution to the future of Jewish life. This is one of the real good guys who's done extraordinary work, and I've watched what he's been doing for years, and it's a kick for me to be able to sit with him. Thank you for joining me for a moment.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing.
Well, that's sweet of you. So, Barry, I first want to ask you to talk to me a moment about yourself, then we'll talk about some of the issues. I'm curious to know, where did you grow up?
I was born in the Bronx, grew up in Washington Heights and in the Bronx.
Okay. What kind of Jewish home?
Kind of like what was sort of Orthodox in those days.
Yes.
It's not like Orthodox today. It was a little looser than,
yes.
than Orthodox, but I went to a wonderful Jewish day school, Yeshiva Rav Moshe Soloveitchik.
Marvelous.
And it was different, you know, it was different in those days.
Okay. Did your parents have a Jewish consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, my father loved Israel and my mother loved Israel. And my mother was she was born in this country, but she was European by nature.
Uh-huh.
You know?
What were your parents' names?
Sarah and Nathan.
Sarah and Nathan. Do you credit them at all with the Jewish identity that you developed?
My parents, sure, of course. Of course. They, you know, my father undeniably loved the Jewish people, and my mother loved the Jewish. They were part of a generation that, like, I knew my grandfather, Harry Markowitz. If you had said to Harry Markowitz, "Aren't you worried that your grandchildren aren't going to be Jewish?" he would have said, "What are they going to be, bananas?" It's like, you know, you are what you are. You know, it was sort of, and the idea of having a spiritual connection to the Jewish people, that was from the yeshiva, really, and it was, you know, something that stays with you forever.
Absolutely. At what point do you personally begin to have an affection for Israel?
I think from the beginning. I mean, you know, but especially, like many people, from the day I got a copy of Exodus as a bar mitzvah gift.
Oh, fabulous.
It was the year that it was published.
Yes.
And, you know, I went to a yeshiva, but we...
Oh, you're talking about the book by Leon Uris.
Oh, yeah.
Not the film with Paul Newman.
No. I'm talking about the book by Leon Uris. And in those days, I went to yeshiva, and we sang the Hatikva every day, and we had an Israeli flag. It was a modern Orthodox Soloveitchik, you know, yeshiva, all of that. Zionist, of course. But I didn't know anything about Israel, and I didn't know anything about the Holocaust. Everything I learned about Israel and Israeli history and the Holocaust, I learned from reading Exodus.
No kidding.
I think it had that kind of impact on people all over the world, including the former Soviet Union.
You're absolutely right. And I remember vividly reading it as well. And I hadn't thought of it till right now. It almost was a generational thing for all of us.
Yes, it was a generational thing.
And Barry, I'm skipping. What's the...
But I must say that the most powerful religious influence on me was Avi Weiss. I need to say that, of course.
I didn't know that about you. I love Avi dearly, and
yeah,
he has been a wonderful friend.
Great man.
So you were very lucky. You had some real powerful people in your life.
Yeah, Rabbi Greenberg, Rabbi Weiss, yeah.
And that also gives you a certain orientation of a modern Orthodox orientation to Jewish life today for yourself, correct?
Yes.
You have a family?
Yes.
How many children?
2 children, 3 grandchildren, 2 on the way.
Mazal Tov. And did you and your wife create sort of a modern Orthodox setting for your own home?
Yeah, we did.
All right. Your kids gravitate to it?
Yes, they do.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, what's the equivalent for our generation today, the young generation today, of the Exodus experience that you and I went through?
Well, so I'll do this in several phases.
Yes.
First phase, talk about generation-changing experiences. So the birth of the State of Israel, the '67 war, which heavily affected me and many people in our generation.
Absolutely.
You know, many people in our generation would have said, we never held up high, our heads up high as Jews in America until the Six-Day War. Huge impact, reading the book, learning about Zionism, learning about that That was all huge. Then my generation ran through a huge change in the 60s. We had a generation-changing experience, not about being Jewish, really about being universal, through the assassination of the president, through the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement.
Where were you in 68?
68, I was just graduating from City College.
Okay. So you were there when a sea change. It was a sea change.
Oh yeah, it changed a whole generation.
Yes.
So what's the generation-changing experience that we have a lot of, that has huge potential if we want to use it? Because it's birthright. I mean, it is what we have right now. We haven't done a great job with the Hebrew schools, and it's the fourth generation in freedom. Ethnicity begins to wither away and die. It's normal. The Pew study shouldn't have been a shock to anybody. But if you want to make a massive change, you have to have a massive immersive experience that changes the way people view the world. Birthright, it doesn't make anybody into a Torah scholar or deeply Jewish, but it makes them love the Jewish people. That's all it does. Mm-hmm. And because it does that, it opens the door to a whole generation if we follow up on it. People think I'm obsessed with birthright. I'm not obsessed with birthright. I've been in this, as I said, since 1970, worried about Jewish identity. By the way, it was no secret that if we could get every single kid to go to Israel, that we could change the whole Jewish future. This is something if we get every single kid to go to Jewish summer camp, it could change the whole Jewish future. But it's only because of two entirely nuts philanthropists, who were so crazy that they believed that they could do this, Bronfman and Steinhardt, right. And then followed up by our unbelievably generous, you can say what you want about Sheldon. This guy has done more to change the Jewish future than anybody, Sheldon and Miri. So it's like, this is a miracle that we have right in our hands. And like usual, as usual, the American Jewish community is in a perfect position to blow the whole thing and screw it up. Because if you ignore it, if you don't do anything with it, if you don't look after those kids, if you don't bring them into contact with Jewish learning and social justice and Jewish action, and by the way, the more stuff the federations do with young adults, the more they get involved. Mm-hmm. It's our whole future. And it's sort of a miracle that we have them at all, because 50% of our kids are being raised in interfaith households. They're not lost. We can get them, but we have to love them and care about them. We have to take this experience they have of loving the Jewish people through birthright and make it into something even bigger. Then we have to rebuild our whole Jewish education system to really take advantage of these new feelings about Jewish peoplehood and deepen that into Jewish spirituality and Jewish learning and everything else that we have.
Okay, I want to take one moment on this, because I want to make sure people who are watching, and Barry, right now we have many Jews and non-Jews watching. I want you to give the audience, 30 seconds on what Birthright is. What is Birthright Israel for anybody who may not know the program?
Birthright Israel is this program that these folks, it started on a very basic premise, which is like your ethnicity, who you are is your birthright. You're born with it. But most of us forget it. It's your birthright, and yet you've missed it. You've lost it. You've lost this contact. And they said if we can get every single Jewish kid to go to Israel by giving them a completely free 10-day trip with good educational content, like I said, it's not going to make anybody into Maimonides, but on the other hand, it's going to leave them with some sense of affection. And then part of this trip, part of this birthright trip, is a mifgash, a meeting. There are usually 10 Israeli soldiers, men and women, on the bus. And the encounter between American Jewish kids who, are into interesting things and are making choices, but they've never had to make a choice about whether they would live or die. They would never had to make a choice about whether anything was important enough to live for, to die for, to live for. And here you're encountering Israeli soldiers, so their encounter with American Jews changes them, and our encounter with them changes us, and the encounter with everything that Israel is, I don't exactly know why, is just transformational. The research is very clear. So, that's sort of what it's about. But you know what? I've taken Christian groups over. Israel changes everybody. You walk through it. This is where Jesus walked. This is where David lived. This is the place that three religions believe is close to the central issue of God in the world. It's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Now, not every young person has gone on Birthright, and At the same time, the numbers are in the hundreds of thousands, correct?
Well, right now we're sending from North America, about 40,000 a year.
Yes.
There are maybe 90,000 Jewish births a year in the United States.
Yes.
So we're close to a tipping point. We're almost at half.
Right.
Half is huge.
Huge.
Because don't forget the 60s generation, all that, it never really touched more than a quarter of the kids, really, but it reshaped the whole culture. So I'm thinking that because if you reach 40 or 50% of all the Jewish kids, you give them a decent experience and some follow-up, then they are then connected through Twitter and their Facebook pages to everybody else. You know, pretty soon you're covering everybody, and they can do important things to strengthen Israel on campus, but also to strengthen the idea that being Jewish has meaning and purpose attached to it.
How do you feel the follow-up has been here in the
Miserable.
United States? Explain why.
Because the federations only recently have become interested in the idea of Jewish identity.
Isn't that a little bit surprising?
It should be surprising, but it's not. I mean, you know, after the Six-Day War, for the next 30 years, federations were obsessed, rightly so, with preserving Israel, sending money to Israel, loving Israel, all of that. It was only by 1989 that you begin to realize that we're losing our own kids. Israel may survive, but our next generation won't. And then you begin to get a little bit more serious about Jewish learning, Jewish identity, but the federations were always focused in other directions. It's only now that we have this so very clear opportunity of what we can do as federations to assure the continuity, not just the continuity, but the spiritual growth, the cultural meaning, the purpose of the next generation. All of this is sort of a brand new opportunity for us, but now you have to translate it. So we have a wonderful new national director of Hillel, and Eric Fingerhut's a great guy, and he now understands that the future of Hillel depends. They've always done well at engaging more traditional kids.
Yes.
But that sort of pushed away the less traditional kids. Birthright is a fountainhead of less traditional kids.
Yes.
They never cared, they never knew anything. They're going to Israel, they're coming back, and they're open. Birthright is now focusing very heavily on attracting those Birthright returnees. They're adopting a program that we started in Boston called IAC. We put a full-time Birthright follow-up person on every campus to recruit the kids and go with the kids and bring them back, make sure they're engaged as part of the Hillel and all other campus activities.
They come back so ready for this.
They're ready.
Right. What do you think of Birthright Next?
Birthright Next is a good national kind of model, although I think it's changing. But look, what does every organization say? What are they worried about, right? You talk to people. Our biggest priority is attracting the next generation. Okay, our biggest priority is attracting the next generation. We're afraid we're going to lose the next generation. Okay, I get it. Well, here they are.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not Birthright Next. Every organization in Jewish life that cares about having an organization alive in 20 years is Birthright Next. So American Jewish Committee should be attracting people who got off of Birthright because it's their future. Any federation that's not obsessed with picking up every kid has completely, even if their only purpose is raising more money, which I think is a big mistake for a federation, even if that's their only goal, to not be obsessed with these kids coming back is craziness. But you can look at, you know, synagogues need to think, not now, they're not going to get them right now, they're young adults. But they need to know that in 5 years or 10 years, these are going to be the kids that are going to populate their synagogues. They need to be obsessed. Hebrew colleges need to be obsessed. Israel is the Sachnut, and they're beginning to not beginning to understand. They've always understood. Getting the kids to come back for a second trip is huge, huge. And then creating educational experiences in Israel for the kids to come back. It's wide open. But we, the federations and the philanthropists, with everything else good that we're doing, with PJ Library, which is amazing, with everything that we're doing, with young families, some big part of what we're doing better be thinking about these young adults that we would have lost. They would have slid off the face of Jewish life. Outreach to interfaith, children of interfaith marriages, outreach to interfaith couples. All of these are now open opportunities for us where before they were gone.
Beautifully said. I want to pick up on two themes you mentioned. First of all, everybody should know that what you have helped to create in the Boston Jewish community is a model of Jewish education. Education if you talk to anybody about what Jewish life is, from a community perspective in Boston, they'll tell you, well, they've done marvelous work in education, day school education, high school education, beyond. I want you to take one moment and talk about how important you feel the educational outreach and the programs that you've been able to help create in the Boston area, why you feel they should be a model for other communities as well.
Well, you know, first of all, the leadership of the Federation need to know how to express this Jewish culture and learning with excitement, because it's so beautiful. You need to be able to say, it's not even just for us. Truth is that without the English translation of the Hebrew Bible, no Shakespeare. The political reformation in England depended on the translation of the Hebrew Bible and the Talmud. The extent of what we could mean to the world is huge, and what we mean to ourselves is huge, and all of that represents an incredible opportunity. So we've been putting money into day schools and into teen program and into intensive Jewish summer camping, everything. But the other thing that we did,
and
which
how
is
hard of a fight was that for you?
No,
it wasn't a hard fight.
No, you just have to believe in it, and you know, and if you're around for a couple of years, you make enough friends and people, and there was a lot of interest. Boston's a very intellectual community.
Yes.
It's a very interesting community. It wants innovation. Our volunteer leaders are amazing. All of that. So I began to think that the key was going to be that there was a whole element that we were missing, which was adult learning. And I learned this from watching the Wexner Heritage people coming back. They were the ones that were establishing day schools. They were the ones that were starting to send their kids to school. Why? They were as alienated as anybody else from all the traditions. They were potential leaders, but not much more. Wexner put them in touch with the leading brains of Jewish intellectual life. And all of a sudden they realized Jewish learning is not their third grade Hebrew education.
Exactly.
It's something, you know, all of a sudden you're walking into a room, it's not your third grade Hebrew school teacher, you know, it's Shia Cohn from Harvard, you know, and, you know, you have to like go, oh, actually, this guy has probably got 30 IQ points on me.
Right.
And you know, he's not, and he thinks this is important, so maybe it's important. Or Erica Brown, like sort of the intellectual artist, poetess of our generation, or these people are amazing. They were able to put them in touch with them. We said we can duplicate this in every single synagogue in Boston. So here's one of the problems. Kid comes home from school and says, Mom, Dad, Hebrew school sucks. Mom says, it sucked when I went. It sucks now. It'll suck when your grandchildren go. Okay, I get it. Then the kid comes in and says, you know, Mom, Dad, they just introduced something in my public school, in my secular school. They say it's a play, but I don't understand it. They say it's in English, but they're speaking English in a way that I can't comprehend it. The men are wearing tights. I don't get this. And they say it's good, but I never want to look at it again, ever. So Dad says, son, I don't ever want you to say that outside of our home. That's Shakespeare. And if you repeat that outside of our home, they will think you are a barbarian and we are barbarians. Because someday, I was bored when I was your age, but someday when I was in high school, I had a teacher who opened my eyes. When I was in college, I finally understood that there's so much human wisdom in this, that it's important. So what's the difference? The difference is the dad was bored when he was in 8th grade, but had his eyes open when he was in high school and college. Nobody ever goes back to Talmud. Nobody ever goes back to Torah after they leave their bar mitzvah education. So if we can make this glorious and bright and brilliant, then that will transmit to kids in a way that nothing else can, and then they will make choices about the Jewish education of their kids that can make a big difference. Similarly, we now have to begin to figure out how to get that level of Jewish learning into the hands of these birthright returnees, but also into the hands of all of the young families that are beginning to come up. It's critical. Before Jewish education will become really important, adults will need to learn that it actually has value for them.
I want to say something to you, and I want to know whether you agree with me or you think you want to modify it. I have argued that the reality of a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old is not yet equipped to understand, assimilate, and appreciate the genius and grandeur of Judaism, which is really meant for adults. The Jewish home is for children, but Jewish education, the Jewish tradition, is really adult-oriented. And I've argued some of what you've just said, that the most crucial time to begin to do serious education is as human beings become ready to accept the insights of the Jewish tradition for their own lives. So when you get kids who are at the end of high school into college, and even more so, Barry, when they become 20 and 30 and now they're thinking of creating their own family, they're open to the genius of the Jewish tradition in a way that was unfair to ask of them as a 12 or 13-year-old. And although I certainly want to address young people and children and do as much as we can to create an emotional bond between a child and the Jewish tradition, when it comes to Wexner, or when it comes to the concepts as you described for Jewish education, I want that for young adults, especially those who are beginning to start a family together, right, when people are most interested in how they're going to shape their family identity. So, does this make sense to you?
So we've been able to make intensive adult Jewish learning into a high status thing.
Exactly.
We've had like 4,000 people go through the program, and they make it clear to all their friends that it's meaningful and important, and that all of that's critically important. However, the importance of day school for the children is that it's the same thing as, it's the same thing in secular education. So you could say, what do we need to have, primary school education for? Well, it creates an environment out of which other stuff can grow.
Yes.
A feeling, an idea. You begin to learn that it's important, that it's got meaning, that it's got purpose. Your parents are continually telling you, if you blow this, basically, baby, not much we're going to be able to do to help you here. And to make it in this world, in this country, this stuff is important. So getting more and more kids into day school where they can actually learn something. The challenge in the other environment is of course we can do things with them in public school about secular education, learning about America, learning about math and science and all the rest of that, is because we have them for, 40 hours a week. When you're dealing with kids 4 hours a week, you've got a problem. Now, every Jewish parent has the option to tie their kids' Jewish education to their own Jewish learning and to create a home in which Jewish stuff is talked about. But in addition to that, they can also make a choice to send their kids to intensive Jewish summer camp, which can make a big difference. The thing is, how do you get the adults to begin to think about these things? Most parents will spend 100 hours trying to figure out what's the best preschool to get my kid into so that they'll get into the best school, get into the best high school, ultimately end up at the ultimate Jewish educational experience, Harvard University. Okay. But if you care about the Jewish future of your kid, you got to spend a little time. I'm not saying everybody's got to choose day school. I think it's a good choice. It's a great choice. But if you're not going to choose it, then you have to have a plan for creating a Jewish environment for your kid. All of that is now up in the air. I mean, you've got to get to the parents. You've got to especially get to the interfaith couples who are making important choices, and we have a chance to actually reach them.
Talk to me then about the interfaith couple, because this is something you've also spent a lot of attention, you paid a lot of attention to and spoken about. What do you think the strategy should be now for the American Jewish community in terms of the intermarriage phenomenon and how we deal with the intermarried couple, the interfaith couple?
Look, I actually think that synagogues that do the best with in-married couples also do the best with interfaith couples. In other words, creating an environment that's warm and loving and kind. It's a phenomenon, but each family are individual human beings. And truly, their lives are focused on the lives of their families. So somehow or other, you have to become part of their lives and help them become part of the life of the larger community. You have to give them access. You have to give them love. You have to give them kindness. Pushing them away isn't going to get anybody anything.
Barry, if you could create policy, would you encourage rabbis to now stand at the chuppah of an intermarrying couple?
So here's what I think. If there's a Reform rabbi, and he's had a young woman, call her Dina, and Dina's been in his congregation, and he taught her her bat mitzvah lessons, and he cared about her, and I think he should stand with her.
Even though she's marrying somebody who's not Jewish?
I think he should stand with her.
That's a courageous thing for you to say,
And just say, I'm here for you. You're part of my family. I'm part of your family. I love you. I hope you make a choice. I hope you decide to raise your kids as Jews.
But you want, Barry Shrage wants that rabbi at the chuppah of Dina marrying a non-Jew.
I would say that I want him to be able to show acceptance and affection and caring, and if that kid wants, it's not a question of officiating, it's a question of being there with love. So I think that there are 3 different stages to this. A Jewish person by birth marries a non-Jewish person who becomes a Jew by choice. That's a Jewish marriage,
of course.
A completely Jewish
of course.
marriage. Maybe some people will quibble about
the
where the conversion was done, but that's a Jewish marriage.
Number 2.
Number 2, family says, we are totally committed to raising our kids as Jews, but for various reasons, the non-Jewish spouse decides not to convert. Various reasons, maybe for her family or his family, maybe. And I would say about that, I would say it's interesting. That couple, by deciding to raise their child in the Jewish religious tradition, which is the way the non-Jewish spouse sees it, because for them, Judaism is actually a religion, amazingly, that they are now part of the Jewish people. They're raising their kid in the Jewish faith, but the most precious thing in their lives will do well if the Jews do well, will do badly if the Jews do badly. That non-Jewish spouse is now part of the Jewish people. This is a household that is, and when we count them in the demographics, they are a Jewish family, part of the Jewish people. So I would say create a ceremony that welcomes them to the Jewish people. Welcome to the household of Israel. You're both not Jewish, but you're welcome to the household of the Jewish people, and our synagogue is open to you. We love you. Look in. We're not going to try to convert you, but we want you to have access to the beauty of Judaism. We want you to think about who we are. We want you to feel comfortable here. Most synagogues are doing that already. So now it's just a question of saying, I'm not formalizing this as a Jewish marriage. What I am doing is formalizing this as your entry path to the Jewish people. That's a different thing, and we need to be open to it. And then the third thing, which is the hardest of all, is someone who hasn't made up their mind yet, who don't know what they're going to do. Like most people don't know what they want to do. And there, what you want to do is to express your love for those kids. You know, you're not compromising anything. You still think that this Jewish thing is the most beautiful thing, the most wonderful thing. It's a beautiful community. It's a beautiful family. It's a beautiful culture. It's meaningful. It lends meaning and purpose to your life. We want to make that accessible to you, but mostly I just want you to know I loved you when you were a little girl. I love you now.
I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Pleasure.
Barry Shrage, who heads the Jewish Federation of Boston, one of the exceptional people who's doing something extraordinary on the Jewish scene. I'm glad you got to meet him here at the 2014 JFNA General Assembly. I'm Mark Golub.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV on JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.